The Olmec were the first major civilization in Mexico following a progressive development in Soconusco. They lived in the tropical lowlands of south-central Mexico, in the present-day states of Veracruz and Tabasco. It has been speculated that Olmec derive in part from neighboring Mokai or mixed Zoc. The Olmec flourished during Mesoamerica's formative period, dating roughly from as early as 1500 BCE to about 400 BCE. Pre-Olmec cultures had flourished in the area since about 2500 BCE, but by 1600 to 1500 BCE, early Olmec culture had emerged. Centered on the San Lorenzo Tenochtitlan site near the coast in southeast Veracruz, they were the first Mesoamerican civilization and laid many of the foundations for the civilizations that followed. Among other firsts, the Olmec appeared to practice ritual bloodletting and played the Mesoamerican ballgame, hallmarks of nearly all subsequent Mesoamerican societies. The aspect of the Olmecs most familiar now is their artwork, particularly the aptly named Colossal Heads. The Olmec civilization was first defined through artifacts which collectors purchased on the pre-Columbian art market in the late 19th century and early 20th century. Olmec artworks are considered among ancient America's most striking. Etymology. The name Olmec comes from the Nahuatl word for the Olmecs, Olmecatl, Olmecatel, or Olmeca, Olmeca. This word is composed of the two words oi, oli, meaning rubber, and mecatl, mecatel, meaning people, so the word means rubber people. Overview. The Olmec heartland is the area in the Gulf lowlands where it expanded after early development in Soconusco. This area is characterized by swampy lowlands punctuated by low hills, ridges, and volcanoes. The Tuxtlas Mountains rise sharply in the north, along the Gulf of Mexico's Bay of Campeche. Here the Olmec constructed permanent city temple complexes at San Lorenzo Tenochtitlan, La Venta, Tres Zapotes, and Laguna de los Cerros. In this region, the first Mesoamerican civilization emerged and reigned from c. 1400 to 400 BCE. Origins. The beginnings of Olmec civilization have traditionally been placed between 1400 and 1200 BCE. Past finds of Olmec remains ritually deposited at El Manatee Shrine moved this back to, at least, 1600 to 1500 BCE. It seems that the Olmec had their roots in early farming cultures of Tabasco, which began between 5100 BCE and 4600 BCE. These shared the same basic food crops and technologies of the later Olmec civilization. What is today called Olmec first appeared fully within the city of San Lorenzo Tenochtitlan, where distinctive Olmec features occurred around 1400 BCE. The rise of civilization was assisted by the local ecology of well-watered alluvial soil, as well as by the transportation network provided by the Coatzacoalcos River basin. This environment may be compared to that of other ancient centers of civilization, the Nile, Indus, and Yellow River valleys, and Mesopotamia. This highly productive environment encouraged a densely concentrated population, which in turn triggered the rise of an elite class. The elite class created the demand for the production of the symbolic and sophisticated luxury artifacts that define Olmec culture. Many of these luxury artifacts were made from materials such as jade, obsidian, and magnetite, which came from distant locations and suggest that early Olmec elites had access to an extensive trading network in Mesoamerica. The source of the most valued jade, for example, is found in the Motagua River Valley in eastern Guatemala, and Olmec obsidian has been traced to sources in the Guatemala highlands, such as El Chayal and San Martin Gilotepec, or in Puebla, distances ranging from 200 to 400 kilometers away, respectively. The state of Guerrero, and in particular its early Metzcala culture, seem to have played an important role in the early history of Olmec culture. Olmec-style artifacts tend to appear earlier in some parts of Guerrero than in the Veracruz-Tabasco area. In particular, the relevant objects from the Amuco Abelino site in Guerrero reveal dates as early as 1530 BC. The city of Teopantecuanatlan in Guerrero is also relevant in this regard. La Venta, the first Olmec center, San Lorenzo, was all but abandoned around 900 BCE at about the same time that La Venta rose to prominence. A wholesale destruction of many San Lorenzo monuments also occurred circa 950 BCE, which may indicate an internal uprising or, less likely, an invasion. The latest thinking, however, is that environmental changes may have been responsible for this shift in Olmec centers, with certain important rivers changing course. In any case, following the decline of San Lorenzo, La Venta became the most prominent Olmec center, lasting from 900 BCE until its abandonment around 400 BCE. La Venta sustained the Olmec cultural traditions, but with spectacular displays of power and wealth. The Great Pyramid was the largest Mesoamerican structure of its time. Even today, after 2,500 years of erosion, it rises 34 meters above the naturally flat landscape. Buried deep within La Venta lay opulent, labor-intensive offerings, 1,000 tons of smooth serpentine blocks, large mosaic pavements, and at least 48 separate deposits of polished jade celts, pottery, figurines, and hematite mirrors. Declined scholars have not determined the cause of the eventual extinction of the Olmec culture. Between 400 and 350 BCE, the population in the eastern half of the Olmec heartland dropped precipitously, and the area was sparsely inhabited until the 19th century. According to archaeologists, this depopulation was probably the result of very serious environmental changes that rendered the region unsuited for large groups of farmers. In particular, changes to the riverine environment that the Olmec depended upon for agriculture, hunting and gathering, and transportation. These changes may have been triggered by tectonic upheavals or subsidence, or the silting up of rivers due to agricultural practices. One theory for the considerable population drop during the terminal formative period is suggested by Santley and colleagues, who propose relocation of settlements due to volcanism, instead of extinction. Volcanic eruptions during the early, late and terminal formative periods would have blanketed the lands and forced the Olmec to move their settlements. Whatever the cause, within a few hundred years of the abandonment of the last Olmec cities, successor cultures became firmly established. The Tres Zapotes site, on the western edge of the Olmec heartland, continued to be occupied well past 400 BCE, but without the hallmarks of the Olmec culture. This post-Olmec culture, often labeled Epi Olmec, has features similar to those found at Ixba, some 550 kilometers to the southeast. Art. The Olmec culture was first defined as an art style, and this continues to be the hallmark of the culture. Wrought in a large number of media, jade, clay, basalt, and greenstone among others, much Olmec art, such as the wrestler, is surprisingly naturalistic. Other art expresses fantastic anthropomorphic creatures, often highly stylized, using an iconography reflective of a religious meaning. Common motifs include downturned mouths and a cleft head, both of which are seen in representations of jaguars. In addition to making human and human-like subjects, Olmec artisans were adept at animal portrayals, for example, the fish vessel to the right or the bird vessel in the gallery below. While Olmec figurines are found abundantly in sites throughout the formative period, the stone monuments such as the Colossal Heads are the most recognizable feature of Olmec culture. These monuments can be divided into four classes. Colossal Heads. Rectangular altars, such as Altar 5 shown below. Freestanding in the round sculpture, such as the twins from El Azuzul or San Martin Pajapan Monument 1, and stelae, such as La Venta Monument 19 above. The stele form was generally introduced later than the colossal heads, altars, or freestanding sculptures. Over time, the stele changed from simple representation of figures, such as Monument 19 or La Venta Stela 1, toward representations of historical events, particularly acts legitimizing rulers. This trend would culminate in post-Olmec monuments such as La Mojara Stela 1, which combines images of rulers with script and calendar dates. Colossal heads. The most recognized aspect of the Olmec civilization are the enormous helmeted heads. As no known pre-Columbian text explains them, these impressive monuments have been the subject of much speculation. Once theorized to be ball players, it is now generally accepted that these heads are portraits of rulers, perhaps dressed as ball players. Infused with individuality, no two heads are alike in the helmet-like headdresses are adorned with distinctive elements, suggesting personal or group symbols. 17 colossal heads have been unearthed to date. The heads range in size from the Rancho La Cobata head, at 3.4 meters high, to the pair at Tres Zapotes, at 1.47 meters. Scholars calculate that the largest heads weigh between 25 and 55 tons. The heads were carved from single blocks or boulders of volcanic basalt, found in the Tuxtlas Mountains. The Tres Zapotes heads, for example, were sculpted from basalt found at the summit of Cerro El Vidra, at the western end of the Tuxtlas. The San Lorenzo and La Venta heads, on the other hand, were probably carved from the basalt of Cerro Sintepec, on the southeastern side, perhaps at the nearby Llano del Jicaro workshop, and dragged or floated to their final destination dozens of miles away. It has been estimated that moving a colossal head required the efforts of 1,500 people for 3 to 4 months. Some of the heads, and many other monuments, have been variously mutilated, buried and disinterred, reset in new locations or reburied. Some monuments, and at least 2 heads, were recycled or recalved, but it is not known whether this was simply due to the scarcity of stone or whether these actions had ritual or other connotations. Scholars believe that some mutilation had significance beyond mere destruction, but some scholars still do not rule out internal conflicts or, less likely, invasion as a factor. The flat-faced, thick-lipped heads have caused some debate due to their resemblance to some African facial characteristics. Based on this comparison, some writers have said that the Olmecs were Africans who had emigrated to the New World. But, the vast majority of archaeologists and other Mesoamerican scholars reject claims of pre-Columbian contacts with Africa. Explanations for the facial features of the colossal heads include the possibility that the heads were carved in this manner due to the shallow space allowed on the basalt boulders. Others note that in addition to the broad noses and thick lips, the eyes of the heads often show the epicanthic fold, and that all these characteristics can still be found in modern Mesoamerican Indians. For instance, in the 1940s the art historian Miguel Covarrubias published a series of photos of Olmec artworks and of the faces of modern Mexican Indians, with very similar facial characteristics. The African origin hypothesis assumes that Olmec carving was intended to be a representation of the inhabitants, an assumption that is hard to justify given the full corpus of representation in Olmec carving. Ivan van Sertima claimed that the 7 braids on the Tres Zapotes head was an Ethiopian hairstyle, but he offered no evidence that this was an Ethiopian hairstyle at the appropriate time. The Egyptologist Frank Yerko has said that the Olmec braids do not resemble contemporary Egyptian or Nubian braids. Richard Deal wrote, "There can be no doubt that the heads depict the American Indian physical type still seen on the streets of Sotiapan, Acayacon, and other towns in the region. Jade face masks. Another type of artifact is much smaller, hard stone carvings in jade of a face in a mask form. Curators and scholars refer to Olmec-style face masks, but, to date, no example has been recovered in an archaeologically controlled Olmec context." They have been recovered from sites of other cultures, including one deliberately deposited in the ceremonial precinct of Tenochtitlan. The mask would presumably have been about 2,000 years old when the Aztec buried it, suggesting such masks were valued and collected as Roman antiquities were in Europe. Beyond the heartland, Olmec-style artifacts, designs, figurines, monuments and iconography have been found in the archaeological records of sites hundreds of kilometers outside the Olmec heartland. These sites include Texcoco and Tlapacoy as major centers of the Texcoco culture in the Valley of Mexico, where artifacts include hollow baby face motif figurines and Olmec designs on ceramics. Chalcatzingo, in Valley of Morelos, which features Olmec-style monumental art and rock art with Olmec-style figures. Teopantecuanitlan, in Guerrero, which features Olmec-style monumental art as well as city plans with distinctive Olmec features. Other sites showing probable Olmec influence include San Bartolo, Tecalacabaj and La Democracia in Guatemala and Zazacatla in Morelos. The Juxtlahuaca and Oxtititlan cave paintings feature Olmec designs and motifs. Many theories have been advanced to account for the occurrence of Olmec influence far outside the heartland, including long-range trade by Olmec merchants, Olmec colonization of other regions, Olmec artisans traveling to other cities, conscious imitation of Olmec artistic styles by developing towns. Some even suggest the prospect of Olmec military domination or that the Olmec iconography was actually developed outside the heartland. The generally accepted, but by no means unanimous, interpretation is that the Olmec-style artifacts, in all sizes, became associated with elite status and were adopted by non-Olmec formative period chieftains in an effort to bolster their status. Notable innovations. In addition to their influence with contemporaneous Mesoamerican cultures, as the first civilization in Mesoamerica, the Olmecs are credited, or speculatively credited, with many firsts, including the bloodletting and perhaps human sacrifice, writing and epigraphy, and the invention of zero and the Mesoamerican calendar, and the Mesoamerican ballgame, as well as perhaps the compass. Some researchers, including artist and art historian Miguel Covarrubias, even postulate that the Olmecs formulated the forerunners of many of the later Mesoamerican deities. Bloodletting and sacrifice speculation. Although the archaeological record does not include explicit representation of Olmec bloodletting, researchers have found other evidence that the Olmec ritually practiced it. For example, numerous natural and ceramic stingray spikes and magi thorns have been found at Olmec sites, and certain artifacts have been identified as bloodletters. The argument that the Olmec instituted human sacrifice is significantly more speculative. No Olmec or Olmec-influenced sacrificial artifacts have yet been discovered. No Olmec or Olmec-influenced artwork unambiguously shows sacrificial victims or scenes of human sacrifice. At the El Manatee site, disarticulated skulls and femurs, as well as the complete skeletons of newborn or unborn children, have been discovered amidst the other offerings, leading to speculation concerning infant sacrifice. Scholars have not determined how the infants met their deaths. Some authors have associated infant sacrifice with Olmec ritual art showing limp jaguar babies, most famously in La Venta's Altar 5 or Las Limas figure. Any definitive answer requires further findings. Writing the Olmec may have been the first civilization in the Western Hemisphere to develop a writing system. Symbols found in 2002 and 2006 date from 650 BCE and 900 BCE respectively, preceding the oldest Zapotec writing, which dates from about 500 BCE. The 2002 find at the San Andrés site shows a bird, speech scrolls, and glyphs that are similar to the later Mayan hieroglyphs. known as the Cascajal block, and dated between 1100 BCE and 900 BCE. The 2006 find from a site near San Lorenzo shows a set of 62 symbols, 28 of which are unique, carved on a serpentine block. A large number of prominent archaeologists have hailed this find as the earliest pre-Columbian writing. Others are skeptical because of the stone's singularity, the fact that it had been removed from any archaeological context, and because it bears no apparent resemblance to any other Mesoamerican writing system. There are also well-documented later hieroglyphs known as Ixba Olmec. And while there are some who believe that Ixba Olmec may represent a transitional script between an earlier Olmec writing system and Mayan writing, the matter remains unsettled. Mesoamerican long count calendar. An invention of the zero concept. The long count calendar, used by many subsequent Mesoamerican civilizations, as well as the concept of zero, may have been devised by the Olmecs. Because the 6 artifacts with the earliest long count calendar dates were all discovered outside the immediate Maya homeland, it is likely that this calendar predated the Maya and was possibly the invention of the Olmecs. Indeed, 3 of these 6 artifacts were found within the Olmec heartland. But an argument against an Olmec origin is the fact that the Olmec civilization had ended by the 4th century BCE. Several centuries before the earliest known long count date artifact. The long count calendar required the use of 0 as a placeholder within its vigesimal positional numeral system. This is one of the earliest uses of the zero concept in history. Mesoamerican Ballgame. The Olmec are strong candidates for originating the Mesoamerican ballgame, so prevalent among later cultures of the region and used for recreational and religious purposes. A dozen rubber balls dating to 1600 BCE or earlier have been found in El Manatí, a bog 10 kilometers east of San Lorenzo Tenochtitlan. These balls predate the earliest ball court yet discovered at Paso de la Ramada, circa 1400 BCE, although there is no certainty that they were used in the ball game.